Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere unusually quiet into the hushed study of an ancient Chinese scholar, lit only by flickering candlelight and filled with the soft rhythmic chirp of a tiny creature you wouldn't expect to share a bed with a cricket. You sit cross-legged on the floor mat's inkstone nearby scrolls curled like sleeping cats. A night breeze nudges a silk curtain and the scent of sandalwood drifts in faint waves. Somewhere in the shadows of this warm paper-walled room, a cricket sings not loud or desperate, but with a sort of patient dignity. You've probably never considered what kind of personality a cricket might have, but don't worry, that's about to change. You'll also discover the odd truth that your average Tang Dynasty scholar may have put more effort into finding the right cricket than the right life partner. And yes, you probably wouldn't survive this lifestyle. Between midnight poetry binges, obsessive bug selection, and a total disregard for modern sleep hygiene, these scholars lived on the thin edge between wisdom and weirdness. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through narrow streets somewhere deep in the heart of Chang'an, the capital of Tang China, a metropolis bursting with silk poetry, bureaucracy, and curiously insects. During the day it's a clamour of foot traffic and dusty feet, but now it's quiet. The kind of quiet that's not empty but full of small invisible sounds. Somewhere under a wooden eave or curled up in a shadowy crevice, the crickets begin their nightly music. For centuries, Chinese scholars, those sleep-deprived robe-swishing insomniacs, found company in crickets. Not out of boredom, but something more poetic, almost spiritual. A good cricket wasn't just white noise, it was a meditation partner, a co-author of verse, a therapist in a cage. Historians still argue whether this was primarily a sensory fascination, a symbolic one, or just a very lonely man's best bet at companionship. Crickets in those early centuries weren't yet bred en masse. They were caught by hand, usually by boys sent by their scholar employers, given a tiny net and a tinier lamp combing through overgrown gardens in early autumn. Why autumn? Because that's when the singing peaks right before winter silences them for good. There's something painfully poetic about that, isn't there? Singing loudest right before the end. Now imagine lying down on a bamboo mat with the moonlight crawling across the ceiling. The room smells like dried plum bark and dust. Your day has been full of memorizing Confucian classics, debating word choice, sipping tepid tea, and maybe dealing with imperial exam prep anxiety. What you want isn't noise, but rhythm. You want something that reminds you the world is still gently spinning, that life continues even when your mind won't settle, and that's where the cricket comes in. A perfect chirp, not too shrill, not too slow, could lull even the most neurotic scholar into sleep. Here's the twist though. You weren't supposed to fall asleep despite the chirp, you were supposed to fall asleep because of it. The cricket wasn't a distraction, it was a guide, a sort of sonic incense burning out into the darkness, and some said that if you listened closely, really closely, you could tell if a cricket was educated, which is probably the most scholarly thing you've ever heard. There are even manuals, yes, actual cricket manuals that describe what to listen for: the clarity of the call, the roundness of the tone, the regularity of the rhythm. Some even claimed you could tell a good cricket by how it paused. Not every chirp deserved a scholar's attention. There were apparently peasant crickets and noble crickets. Don't worry, we'll meet them all. Meanwhile, outside the scholar's window, the sounds of the city gently dissolve. A cart rattles by, a beggar coughs, someone's playing a bamboo flute far off not particularly well. But in here the only sound is the pulsing rhythm of that cricket, and you realise it's not just any cricket, it's a companion, maybe even a mirror. One tiny voice reminding you that silence isn't empty, it's textured, alive. Some modern researchers suggest the obsession with crickets was a mix of aesthetics and insomnia. Others insist it was rooted in Taoist listening practices, tuning your breath to the rhythm of nature. And a few whisper that these scholars were just extremely lonely men with extremely vivid imaginations. The truth? Probably a mix of all three, and maybe that's what makes it beautiful. You shift on the mat, suddenly more aware of how the walls creak and your heartbeat slows. Outside, the stars are so clear they almost make a noise of their own. The cricket chirps once more, steady and sure. You exhale, and you begin to wonder what kind of person spends their life perfecting the art of sleeping beside a cricket. Well, you're about to find out. You're still in the soft-shadowed study, but now the candle's burned lower, its little pool of light more golden, more fragile. The chirp continues steady and sure, like an old friend clearing their throat every few seconds to remind you they're still there. The cricket's rhythm becomes the pulse of the night, and for scholars of the Tang dynasty that rhythm became a bit of an obsession. Sleeplessness wasn't just a nuisance in ancient China, it was a philosophical conundrum. If you couldn't sleep, maybe your soul was troubled. Maybe your qi was misaligned. Maybe your ancestors were whispering too loudly. Insomnia wasn't cured with pills or blue light filters, but with 100 odd little rituals, rubbing warm stones against your belly, steeping wolfberry tea in moonlight, or as some preferred, listening to the delicate lull of a cricket's song. Tang scholars weren't known for their chill. These were the men who wrote 12,000-word essays on the placement of a single brushstroke. Their lives revolved around the civil service exams, the Confucian classics, and the constant fear of failure. It's no surprise they struggled to sleep, but rather than numbing themselves with the alcohol or counting sheep, they leaned in. They embraced the night, and what they found in that quiet was a chirping companion that somehow made things bearable. Imagine this, you've just flunked your third attempt at the Jinchi exam. Your family's disappointed, your colleagues are passive-aggressively smug, and the government job you dreamed of has vanished like mist. But in your rented attic, with roof tiles cracked and wind slipping through the paper walls, a cricket sings. He doesn't judge. He doesn't care about your ranking or your penmanship. He just sings like nothing else matters. And for a few moments, neither does anything else. Historians still argue whether this fondness for crickets was a coping mechanism, a cultural aesthetic, or a full-blown spiritual practice. Some scholars call it auditory calligraphy, the idea that listening to a cricket's song was akin to reading a perfectly formed character. Others point to Taoist texts that suggest stillness and smallness are signs of cosmic wisdom. And then there's the boring likely answer, they just like the sound. But what a sound it was. Now you might think all crickets sound the same, but you'd be wrong, and the Tang knew better. There were short chirps and long trills, fast pulses and slow sleepy whines. Some had a crisp dry sound like fingers on parchment. Others purred like a soft kettle beginning to boil. The discerning scholar didn't just choose any cricket. He found his cricket the one whose voice felt like a balm to his particular brand of existential dread. And because nothing in ancient China was ever simple, there was etiquette. You couldn't just plop a cricket in a clay jar and call it a day. You needed a suitable home, a carved gourd or a bamboo cage lined with mulberry paper. Sometimes the cage was shaped like a miniature pagoda, with a sliding lid and intricate lattice work. These weren't bug containers, they were tiny sanctuaries, and you, the sleepless scholar, were their humble steward. Of course not all crickets performed well. Some chirped too erratically, some stopped altogether, others were just off, like a badly tuned flute. In such cases you didn't scold them, you set them free, or in more tragic cases accidentally squished them with your scroll pile. But when you found the right one, oh the bliss. The perfect cricket could bring tears to a scholar's eyes. One Tang writer even claimed that his cricket helped him translate silence into poetry, which is both beautiful and the kind of thing someone says when they've been awake for 3 nights and are starting to hallucinate. Crickets also became a kind of personality test. If you preferred slow, mournful tones, you were thought to be contemplative and deep. If you liked rapid chirps, you were too excited, a red flag in Confucian circles. One poet confessed he preferred crickets that chirped unevenly because it reminded him of human conversation. Another insisted he only collected crickets whose rhythm matched his pulse. At a certain point, the obsession reached ridiculous levels. Some elite scholars commissioned cricket catchers. These were professional bug hunters, usually young boys or wandering monks, who knew the back alleys and overgrown gardens of the city like the back of their hand. They could hear a chirp from 30 feet and tell you whether it came from a noble cricket or a fraud. Some even carried tiny nets made of silk and bamboo prize tools passed down through generations like magic wands, and when they caught the prize they presented it like a jewel, hands cupped, face reverent. "This one sings like autumn wind on mountain stone," one catcher whispered, offering a sleek black cricket to a scholar who hadn't smiled in weeks. Sometimes that was all it took to bring someone back from the brink. So you lie there, eyes half-lidded, the cricket still chirping from its tiny gourd palace. The wind brushes past again, softer this time. You realise that even in a world with no light bulbs, no podcasts, no ASMR playlists, people still needed a little sound to help them drift off. Something ancient and repetitive. Something that felt like a lullaby for grown-ups who read too much and slept too little. And you begin to understand this isn't about crickets, it's about listening. You roll onto your side, the mat creaking slightly beneath you. Somewhere beside the inkstone and the slowly guttering candle, the cricket is still singing, now more faint, like it too is getting sleepy. But the real magic of this companionship wasn't found in the study. It began outside, in the tangled moonlit courtyards and dew-drenched gardens of China's early autumn. Because before a cricket could chirp you to sleep, someone had to catch it. And tonight that someone is, well, it's you. You pad softly along a garden path in your cloth slippers. The moon hangs low and bright, silvering the bamboo thickets and peach trees. The air smells faintly of plum wine and fallen leaves. You carry a small basket in one hand, a sliver of oiled paper in the other to reflect moonlight. You're not alone. Other figures wander through the grass, bent low, moving with the slow, practiced grace of ritual. You've joined a midnight cricket hunt. This wasn't a child's game. For scholars, poets, and even minor nobles, hunting crickets was serious business, and it happened almost exclusively at night because that's when the choicest males sang, hoping for romance, completely unaware that their musical talent was about to earn them a cosy life in a gourd and a name like Little Autumn Voice. Crickets were seasonal like mooncakes and melancholy. You couldn't catch a good one in spring. Summer was too noisy. But autumn was perfect. The air cooled, the leaves rustled, and the crickets, knowing their time was short, sang like their tiny lives depended on it. Which they sort of did. Catching one wasn't just a matter of grabbing. You had to listen. Find the source of the song, not be fooled by echoes, creep slowly until you pinpointed the singer's exact hiding spot, often beneath a loose tile under a bush, or tucked into the base of a wall. Then came the hard part, not scaring it away. Some used soft nets, others used a curled leaf or a carved scoop to gently coax it into their basket. But the most dedicated used their bare hands, cupping the insect like a delicate secret. One scholar described the moment of success as holding the moon between your palms. And no, not all crickets were created equal. The little black ones were preferred for tone. The reddish-brown ones was considered too sharp. If your cricket chirped too fast, it was said to have an impatient soul. Too slow, melancholic, and prone to long silences. There were even cricket markets in larger cities. Imagine a tiny bug bazaar tucked between herbalists and scroll sellers. Men hunched over cages no bigger than a teacup arguing over the merits of one chirp versus another. This one sings in 3 perfect beats, someone might say, pointing to a cricket with shimmering wings. Ah, but mine sounds like frost melting from pine, another would counter. You know, normal conversations. And of course there were frauds. Sellers who would insert tiny pieces of reed into a cricket's cage to subtly amplify or alter its tone. Some even sold 2 crickets in one cage so they'd compete vocally, creating the illusion of a superbug. It's unclear who first fell for this. But one imagines the moment of realization came late at night as the scholar sipped tea and muttered, "Wait, why does my cricket sound like 2 crickets?" Historians still argue whether this kind of bug trading culture was driven by genuine aesthetic appreciation or early-stage gambling addiction. Some believe it was linked to social status. Having a finely toned cricket was like owning a rare lute or quoting obscure poetry. Others suggest it was simply the most socially acceptable way for anxious, overworked scholars to relax without appearing lazy. But to truly understand the appeal, you have to go back to the moment of capture. You're still kneeling in the garden. The ground is cool. Your heart beats just a little faster. The chirp is close, so close, and you ease forward, lifting a flat rock. There he is, jet black, glossy, with legs twitching slightly. You move slowly, fingers outstretched. There's a moment of suspense. Will he leap away? No, he stays. You close your hand gently, then deposit him into your little woven basket. Inside, you've already lined it with a shred of mulberry bark for comfort and a tiny dish of moistened rice. Because even a cricket deserves a soft landing. The wind rustles the branches, and somewhere another scholar softly curses in frustration as his chosen cricket escapes. You smile, not because you won anything, but because you caught something real, something small and alive and fleeting. A piece of autumn you can take home and listen to in the long sleepless nights ahead. Back in the study, you place your cricket gently into its temporary home, a ceramic jar with a pierced lid. It adjusts for a moment, then resumes its song. Not identical to before, but close, maybe even better. You listen, eyes closed, as the sound settles into the corners of the room. It's not loud, not distracting, just present, like the ticking of a clock that doesn't count time but memories. You lie back once again, head pillowed on your folded sleeve. The cricket sings, the night deepens, and a strange sense of satisfaction creeps over you. You didn't just catch a cricket, you caught a moment. The candle's almost out now. It sputters occasionally, casting dancing shadows on the parchment-covered walls. You're lying there, eyes half closed, and your newly acquired cricket is chirping from its little ceramic pot, like it's always belonged here. But as your eyelids droop, another realization creeps in. This humble insect now needs a proper home. Because in ancient China, a serious scholar wouldn't just toss a cricket into a soup bowl and call it a night. Oh no, that would be uncivilized. There was an entire art to building cricket homes. Tiny architecture designed not just for containment but for acoustic performance health, and maybe even status signalling. Welcome to the miniature world of cricket housing. You sit up slightly, reaching for a lacquered box near the inkstone. Inside cages, not one but several. Some are carved from bamboo with paper-thin slats, others shaped from hollowed gourds polished to a silky sheen. A few are stone cool and heavy with lids that twist like puzzle boxes. One is even made of ivory, though you pretend not to like that one too much. It's a bit showy. The materials mattered. Bamboo was breathable. Gourd kept the tone warm and slightly muffled, perfect for bedtime listening. Clay was better for day crickets, whose voices you wanted crisp and clear. Some scholars kept separate housing for different times of day, like a nobleman choosing between breakfast and dinner robes. The cricket's home had to be clean but also resonant. Too many holes and the chirp vanished into the room. Too few and the sound was muffled like a cough behind a wall. Historians still argue whether the design was more about airflow or audio tuning, but many cages included carefully placed vents said to centre the voice. Then came the bedding. You didn't just toss in some dirt. No, the base might include finely chopped pine needles, dried moss, even the softest slivers of mulberry bark. All to ensure the cricket felt emotionally stable, an actual phrase used in a few old manuals, because apparently a stressed cricket is a silent cricket. There were accessories, 2 tiny dishes for water microspoons made of ivory or bronze to place food, usually soaked rice, fruit peel or bits of cabbage leaf. Some truly elite scholars added toys, yes toys, like little twigs for climbing, or more practically tiny partitions for privacy. A modest cricket, after all, may prefer not to be watched while eating. You can't help but smile at the absurd devotion, but at the same time it makes sense. This wasn't just about catching a bug and forgetting it. This was a relationship, a nightly ritual. And like all relationships, it thrived on attention to detail. You gently lift your cricket from its transport jar and transfer it to a small gourd cage, its walls polished and curved like a miniature moon. As soon as the little creature adjusts, it begins to chirp again, a bit hesitant at first, then more confidently. The sound deepens slightly, made richer by the gourd's shape. And here's where things get weirder. Some scholars believe that a good cricket cage could actually change a cricket's chirp over time, that by providing the right acoustic encouragement, you could guide the bug to a more pleasing rhythm. This may or may not be true, but it does sound like the kind of hopeful nonsense insomniacs believe at 2 a.m. Others went further, claiming that different cage materials induced different moods in the crickets. Stone made them stoic, wood made them lyrical, gourd, that made them thoughtful. You wonder whether your cricket is thoughtful. He seems thoughtful. Or maybe you're just projecting again. In certain provinces there were even competitions, not fights. Not yet, we'll get to those later, based purely on singing. Owners would bring their best-sounding crickets to a sort of sleepover, cages lined up on a lacquered table. Everyone leaned in, and then silence, until one chirped, then another, and another. The room would fill with a sort of sleepy symphony. No shouting, no cheering, just men nodding solemnly to the rhythm of 6-legged lullabies. And because human nature never changes, there were cheaters. Some cricket keepers learned to mimic the sounds themselves, tricking judges into believing their bug was especially vocal. Others rubbed the cricket's legs gently with damp cloths to wake them up before showtime. One particularly daring rogue even slipped a grasshopper into the cage and blamed the unexpected volume on inner growth. Eventually, some regions banned these contests not because of violence, but because of too much excitement. Imagine the government saying, "You there, yes you with the polished gourd, calm down, this is sleep history." Back in your little study, the cricket continues its private recital. You shift the gourd slightly, testing its acoustics. Move it closer to the wall, and the sound bounces gently back. Tuck it near the window, and the night wind carries it outward like a lullaby for the stars. You sigh and lie back down. The candle's gone now. Only the moonlight remains, and the soft, regular chirp of your well-housed, emotionally stable roommate. Maybe it's not the cage that matters. Maybe it's the fact that someone took the time to build one, to care, to listen. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes the song worth hearing. The moon drifts slightly across the paper-screened window as the night deepens, the gourd cage glowing faintly in the silver light. Your cricket is in full recital mode now. Not aggressive or showy, just consistent, confident, like an old friend reciting a well-worn poem for the 100th time. You listen half awake and start to wonder, how did anyone ever decide what makes one cricket better than another? Because here's the truth, these tiny singers were judged with the scrutiny of opera divas. The Chinese scholar class didn't mess around. A cricket wasn't just a cricket. It had to earn its keep with tone, rhythm, style, even personality. Imagine a job interview, but the applicant is an insect, and the interviewer is a man who's read the Book of Rites. So many times he now dreams in classical Chinese. Cricket assessment, as odd as it sounds, was an actual skill. There were handwritten guides and cricket connoisseurs, yes, cricket connoisseurs who knew the exact traits of a prize specimen. They'd lean close to a cage eyes half shut and judge the song like sommeliers judging the finish on a glass of plum wine. Tone was everything. Was it rich and full-bodied or thin and scratchy? A good cricket didn't squeak, it sang. Some were praised for a deep temple bell sound, others for a soft rain-on-tile quality. If your cricket chirped like a broken hinge, you'd best trade it in before your scholar friends started talking. Next came rhythm. A good cricket chirped in sets, 3 clean chirps, pause, then 3 again. The tempo should be regular, but not robotic. Think of it like a heartbeat with emotion. Too slow and the cricket was dull-witted. Too fast and it was undisciplined. You wanted measured enthusiasm. Pitch also mattered. Some scholars preferred higher chirps, sharp, like frost cracking. Others liked lower tones, calling them earth voices. There were debates, yes, full-on arguments about whether a good cricket should sound like dawn breaking or dusk descending. One famed poet even insisted that his favourite bug sounded like a memory of laughter across water, whatever that means. And don't even get started on leg timbre. Some crickets chirped with a slight rasp, while others had a smooth trill. Some cages came with resonance charts, allowing owners to measure and document slight tonal shifts from day to day. One gentleman wrote an entire scroll-length essay titled "On the Consistency of Little Mountain," referring to the cricket he kept beside his inkstand for 8 years. Spoiler, Little Mountain eventually retired, living out his final days in a gourd bigger than most apartments. But here's where things take a delightful left turn. Crickets began to receive names, biographies and emotional backstories. Yes, really. A truly distinguished cricket might be named Autumn Lantern, Distant Wind, or Ink Companion. He might be described as solemn in tone, faithful in rhythm, or unshaken in the face of silence. One scholar even claimed his cricket stopped chirping during storms out of respect for the sky. Some scholars wrote poems to their crickets, others wrote as their crickets. One particularly lonely gentleman, Duan Shu of the late Song dynasty, penned a letter to his cricket after its death. It read in part, "You who knew my hours, you who did not flee when I wept, sleep now in stillness, my small singer." Historians still argue whether this was sincere grief poetic theatre, or a side effect of drinking warm rice wine while surrounded by too many scrolls and too little human contact. But either way, it's kind of sweet. Of course, not all crickets lived up to expectations. There were disappointments, duds. Crickets who chirped too much, too little, or only at the wrong times. Some had poor startle control, a fancy term meaning they stopped chirping every time a mouse sneezed 2 rooms away. These crickets were politely retired, released back into the wild, or handed off to less discerning listeners like curious children or unpoetic uncles. The elite crickets, though, were doted on. Their cages were rotated during the day to prevent one side of the body from becoming overworked. They were given specific food schedules. Some were even taken on trips, yes, vacations, with their scholar owners. One Tang record tells of a poet who brought his cricket on a pilgrimage to Mount Lu, insisting the thin mountain air made the chirp more sincere. Another traveller wrote that he wrapped his gourd cage in silk and nestled it in a pouch next to his chest, so that its voice might calm my own heart on the winding road. Was it excessive? Probably. Was it a little unhinged? Also, yes. But also, was it kind of beautiful? You glance at your own little gourd cage. The cricket is still chirping steady and clear, as if it knows you're listening with new ears now. As if it senses you finally understand the weight of its tiny song. Not just a noise, but a comfort, a companion, a subtle mirror to your own rhythm, and somewhere in the distance another cricket replies faint and far away but unmistakably present, like two candle flames flickering in different rooms of the same old house. You're still awake, but not in the way that makes you anxious. It's a kind of gentle awareness, like your mind has curled up beside the cricket and decided it doesn't need to do anything else tonight. Outside, the wind shifts again, brushing across the roof tiles, and the moonlight slides slightly across the floor. In this quiet, you begin to notice the scholar beside you isn't just listening to the cricket. He's talking to it. Not loudly, not conversationally, more like confiding. Because while modern people might whisper into journals or DM their thoughts into the void, ancient Chinese scholars often turned to their crickets. You wouldn't think a bug with a lifespan shorter than a semester could offer companionship, but in this world it did. And not just companionship, connection. The scholar leans in, elbows on the desk, hands wrapped around his tea. "You understand, don't you?" he murmurs to the cage. "They rejected my latest essay, said it was too esoteric, as if that's a flaw. The cricket chirps once, exactly the scholar says. They wouldn't know metaphor if it bit them. And the cricket chirps again. This isn't madness, not yet. In fact, it was relatively common. Scholars would speak aloud to their crickets during long nights of study, not necessarily expecting answers, but appreciating the rhythm of a reply. Something about the timing, the call and response. One voice human, the other insect forming a strange duet. You begin to see why this became a habit. The scholar's world was all thought layers and layers of thinking stacked like scrolls in a dusty archive. But the cricket was immediate, present. It didn't care about literary allusions or calligraphy rankings. It sang or it didn't. It was consistent, honest, unlike many humans. There are records, real ones, of scholars growing so emotionally attached to their crickets that they built tiny memorials after they died. Small tablets carved with poetry, little mounds in garden corners, even shrines made of bark and twine. One man, Zhou Lun of the Southern Song period, hosted a wake for his cricket. He invited 3 colleagues, served tea, and read aloud the poems the insect had inspired. The evening ended with the toast to faithful listeners, winged and otherwise. Historians still argue whether this behaviour was an early sign of emotional displacement, ritualised grief, or just a poetic expression of solitude. But whichever theory you favour, one thing is clear: these crickets mattered. You shift slightly your mat, whispering against the floor. Your own cricket pauses its chirp, then resumes steady, but now somehow intimate. You half expect it to look up and say something wise, or at least raise a tiny cup of tea in sympathy. Poets leaned especially hard into this kind of connection. To them, the cricket was more than a sleep aid. It was a muse, a kind of winged metaphor for mortality, persistence, or most commonly melancholy. There are literally hundreds of poems about crickets, many written in moments of heartbreak, exile, or existential pondering. One popular verse from the Tang dynasty reads, "Alone I sit, while autumn folds the day, the cricket sings what I cannot say. No wife, no child, no lamp still burning bright, just song and silence and this creeping night. It's beautiful. It's a little sad." And it sums up why the cricket had such power. It wasn't that it distracted scholars from their problems. It was that it understood them without words. You think about how quiet your own room can be, how heavy the silence sometimes feels, when you've had one of those days when nothing goes right, no one replies, and sleep seems like a reward withheld. In those moments, a small rhythmic sound can be a gift. Not to fill the space, but to gently shape it. The scholar sighs, places his cup down, and says softly to the gourd cage, "You know you're more reliable than most people." The cricket chirps as if flattered. And in the candle's fading glow, you get it. Truly get it. The cricket isn't just a bug in a box, it's a presence, a little pulse of life reminding you that the night is still here, still moving, still singing, that you're not quite as alone as you feel. Some later writers took this relationship even further, imagining crickets as symbolic versions of themselves. One 17th century scholar wrote a parable in which he became a cricket in his dreams, chirping in a gourd atop a mountain, advising lost travellers by tone alone. It was considered weird at the time, but also kind of genius. The gourd cage beside you rattles slightly as your cricket shifts, then settles again. The chirps return a bit softer now. Maybe he's getting tired too. You pull your blanket tighter and let the rhythm guide your breath. In, out, chirp, pause, chirp. The scholar's head nods forward. He's finally dozing off mid-poem. The ink brush slips from his fingers. You smile. Even the overthinkers sleep eventually. And maybe it takes a cricket to show them how. The scholar snores gently, now hunched over his desk like a forgotten statue draped in silk. One sleeve trails into an ink puddle, but he doesn't stir. Beside him, the cricket keeps chirping, faithful as ever, a tiny metronome for sleep. You remain awake, but not restlessly. It's that suspended kind of wakefulness where you're weightless, not thinking forward or back, just listening. The night is so quiet that the cricket's song seems louder, more layered. You start to notice its rhythm looping, varying ever so slightly. There's a pattern there like music, and that's when you realise something odd. This chirping has been turned into poetry, and not just because poets liked bugs. The crickets themselves were subjects of actual verse across dynasties, cities and heartbreaks. Scholars would sit stylus in hand-gored cage beside them and compose couplets inspired directly by their insect roommates. Some poems were simple bedtime thoughts. Others spiralled into full-blown epics about lost longing and the sound of time. There's something kind of beautiful about that. Imagine building an entire emotional landscape out of a six-legged serenade. These weren't just bug poems. They were lullabies in disguise. One of the most beloved Tang poems begins like this. Chirp, chirp through the night, the cricket weaves what dreams won't write. You picture the poet sitting just as you are now, face half-lit, the faintest sigh curling out as he scratches lines onto a bamboo slip. His heart is heavy, missed chances, lost friends' exams that never went his way. But he doesn't weep. He listens and writes. The cricket does the weeping for him. In fact, some poets believe the cricket's song came from sorrow, that every chirp was a sigh, a lament. The chirping was thought to carry the season's own melancholy, the knowledge that winter was coming, that life was fragile, and that time always marched on. Historians still argue whether these poems were sincere emotional outpourings, or just exercises in style. Some scholars insist the cricket was merely a seasonal motif like red leaves or frost on tiles. Others claim the emotions ran deeper, reflecting real isolation in a hyper-competitive, overeducated world. And some even argue the poems were a secret form of protest using nature to subtly critique the rigidity of Confucian order. But you're not thinking about theory right now. You're just letting the sound blend with the imagined words. If you try, you can almost hear a hidden poem behind each chirp. In the dark, no ink remains, but still the bug sings. It's easy to romanticize, you know. Easy to imagine these scholars as dreamy introverts wandering moonlit courtyards and composing verse to chirping bugs. But life was rarely that soft. Many of these men lived hard, narrow lives, trapped in bureaucracy, choked by expectation. Their days were dictated by scrolls, superiors, and social formality. A failed exam could end your career. A single impolite phrase could exile you from the capital forever. And in all that tension, the cricket was safe, honest, lacking pretense. That's probably why so many verses about them read like confessions, whispered things no one else was allowed to hear. One Southern song poet wrote, "I dare not speak to friends my ache. but little voice chirps and my hands shake. A little melodramatic, sure. But haven't you ever been awake at 2 a.m. staring at the ceiling and suddenly felt like only your pet, your plant, your fridge, your neighbours snoring understood? Same energy, just more poetic. Cricket poetry also had its own subgenres. Some were meditations on time, others were straight-up lullabies. Parents would recite these to children during late autumn nights, hoping the rhythm might carry them into dreams. There's an old lullaby from the Ming dynasty that goes something like this. Close your eyes and let him sing, cricket knows the hush of spring. Though he fades when snow is near, he leaves his song inside your ear. You picture a mother whispering those words to a child bundled in padded cotton, the gourd cage resting on the windowsill, a soft chirping humming beneath her voice. And then there were love poems. Yes, somehow even crickets got tangled into romance. A few cheeky writers used cricket songs as metaphors for longing, like, she does not answer my letters, but at least the cricket still calls my name, which, to be fair, is a mood. But there's also something endearing about that level of projection. The idea that even in heartbreak a scholar could find solace in a consistent sound. The chirp was a placeholder for what they wished someone would say. You close your eyes listening again, and for a moment you feel like you've stepped into one of those verses. You, the cricket, the moonlight together making a poem that no one will write down but that exists just the same. The scholar beside you stirs slightly, muttering something in his sleep about the fifth tone being too shrill. Classic. You smile and pull the blanket closer. Out there, history's full of battle horns and palace gossip and economic collapse. But in here, in this tiny quiet room filled with old paper and one stubborn insect, it's just poetry. The night has sunk into that deep velvet silence that only exists in the few hours before dawn. Even the wind seems to have curled up somewhere to rest. You're lying there, cocooned in quiet, and just as your eyelids begin to sink, the cricket shifts slightly and then chirps louder this time, not annoyed, more like excited. Why? Because tonight is not just for sleepy poetry and scholar sighs. No. Tonight, somewhere not far from this peaceful study is an arena, and in that tiny bamboo-walled coliseum bugs will battle. Welcome to the surprisingly intense world of cricket fighting. Yes, it happened, and yes, it was taken very seriously. Let's get something straight up front, this wasn't a barbaric spectacle. At least not in the way modern folks imagine when they hear insect combat. There was no blood, no gore, no cheering crowds waving gambling slips and yelling "kick his thorax." No cricket fighting in imperial China was, believe it or not, a refined, ritualized tradition. One that spanned over 1,000 years and at its peak even reached the palaces of emperors. It began with observation. Certain crickets, always males because they're the chirpers, displayed natural aggression, especially in late summer and early autumn. They'd square off in the wild, chirping louder, spreading their wings, tapping the ground like little martial artists. Enter the humans. Someone at some point decided, what if we let them fight? Just a little, and made it ceremonial. Soon after, cricket fighting became both hobby and science. And yes, there were official manuals. One surviving treatise from the Ming dynasty lists over 40 traits for identifying a strong fighter: jaw width, leg length, wing stiffness, even antenna confidence, which is exactly as adorable as it sounds. Handlers would house their champions in individual clay pots, feed them strict diets of fresh greens, bits of rice, or tiny slivers of shrimp. A cricket in training might be massaged with soft brushes to keep him limber. Some were exposed to the sound of rival chirps to build mental resilience. In other words, ancient bug boot camp. Now picture it, 2 scholars sit cross-legged across from each other. Between them a small lacquered tray with a circle drawn in the centre. From opposite ends each releases their chosen warrior. The bugs hesitate. Antennae twitch. They circle, then contact a quick grapple. The winner flips the other. No injuries, just a clear victor. The crowd, probably two men nodding silently, pretending this isn't the most exciting thing they've seen all week. Historians still argue whether cricket fighting was more about gambling, entertainment, or status. Some say it was a stress outlet for overworked bureaucrats. Others believe it was a symbolic ritual of control man imposing order on the chaos of nature. A few scholars even suggest it was a way to test character. If your cricket showed honour, perhaps you did too. At its peak, cricket fighting made its way to the imperial court. One emperor of the Song dynasty, Emperor Xuanzong, was reportedly obsessed. He had entire rooms devoted to cricket breeding. Handlers were employed, records were kept. There was even an official cricket keeper, a court position with surprising power. One bad season, that guy was in big trouble. Of course, with prestige came money. People began betting. Not openly, gambling was frowned upon, but with sly nods and sideways exchanges. And like all things involving stakes, some people cheated. They added dust to a rival cricket's food to dull its energy. Others secretly clipped wings. One handler was caught whispering insults to the opposing bug the night before a match. Apparently, psychological warfare isn't just for humans. Back in your quiet room, the idea of cricket brawl seems hilariously out of place. Your own little singer tucked snugly into his gourd chirps in what can only be described as absolutely not a fighter tone. If he were a human, he'd wear glasses and recommend poetry books. Still, you wonder, did he have a grandfather who once flipped a champion in a clay ring? You smile at the thought. Maybe there's a secret lineage there. Maybe your cricket hums not only with song but with ancestral pride. And honestly, that's not far off from how ancient Chinese families treated them. In some regions, particularly among wealthy urbanites, cricket fighting was passed down from father to son like a prized heirloom. The best cages were inherited. Techniques were whispered, not written. One late Ming gentleman claimed his grandfather had a cricket so fierce it once defeated 3 challengers in one night, and then sang a poem. You can't make this stuff up. Well, they might have, but you can't. There were even retirement plans for winning crickets. After a good season, a champion bug might be placed in a cushy cage, fed the best melon shavings, and allowed to chirp in peace. Some were given names, carved plaques, even tiny paper banners hung beside their jars. And when they passed, the tributes flowed. You imagine one such funeral now, a line of solemn scholars in grey robes, incense smoke curling into the autumn air. A gourd cage sits on a lacquer tray. The elder scholar clears his throat, reads a poem, brave of heart, small of wing. You fought, you sang, you go now to sleep. The wind rises, a single leaf drops, and someone whispers he would have won next year too. You laugh quietly under your breath, then yawn. Your own cricket responds not loudly, just a soft trill like he's heard this story 1,000 times and still enjoys it. Fighting or not, it turns out crickets did more than lull poets to sleep. They gave them something to root for, something to raise, something to believe in, even if it was just a bug with a good right hook and a solid sense of timing. The candle's long gone now. Only the moon keeps watch, a thin white disk drifting just past the edge of your window screen. You've almost drifted off when your cricket, faithful, poetic, and decidedly not a fighter, suddenly goes quiet. Silence. And not the kind that feels restful. This is the kind of silence that makes you lift your head. Because you've heard the stories. In villages all across ancient China, there was one shared fear among cricket keepers. Scholars, street kids, and emperors alike, the Great Autumn Disappearance. It happened every year, usually late in the 9th lunar month. Crickets once chirping in every corner of the garden vanished almost overnight. Not one by one, not gradually, just gone. No sound, no flutter of wing, just the empty hush of winter creeping in. You sit up slightly, listening harder now. Was that one outside? No, just the wind. For ancient Chinese scholars, the disappearance of the crickets was more than a seasonal event, it was a reckoning. Imagine depending on a sound to keep you company, to calm your thoughts, to carry your verses. And then one morning you step outside and the garden is quiet, not just less noisy still, as if something has been taken, and you don't know whether to be sad or just very, very small. Entire records document this annual vanishing. Some scholars marked it like a holiday for Silence Day. Others refused to write on that morning, believing the loss of the cricket's voice would pollute the tone of their poetry. A few mourned openly burning incense beside empty cages. One late Tang diarist noted, "The chirp is gone. I am now alone with my thoughts again. They're louder than I remember." Yikes. But what's fascinating is how prepared people were for this moment. Cricket owners treated their bugs like the seasons themselves, meant to visit, not stay. And when the chirps faded, they didn't panic. Well, some did, but let's not judge. Many leaned into the melancholy, wrote more, listened harder, found meaning in the silence. Still, that didn't stop a certain kind of person from freaking out. Enter the emergency cricket hunters. When a beloved cricket vanished too soon, desperate keepers, especially wealthy ones, hired teams of boys herbalists, or even wandering monks to scour the countryside for replacements. These weren't casual collectors. These were elite bug trackers armed with gourd nets, bamboo tubes, and an uncanny ability to distinguish chirp species by echo alone. One 12th century noble famously sent his servant on a 10-day journey to retrieve a single cricket species rumoured to sing with the timbre of an exiled flute. The servant returned with a cricket and a broken foot. The noble burst into tears, not for the injury, but for the fact that the cricket only chirped during rain. Sometimes people overcommit. This cricket scarcity even led to price spikes. Yes, market inflation. Autumn cricket prices could double overnight. The very best chirpers fetched more than a silk robe or a mule. And with money came fraud. Merchants started dyeing lesser bugs to match the royal black strain. Some glued slightly longer legs to the standard types. One particularly infamous scam involved tiny speakers. Okay, not speakers, but little tubes that funnel the sound of another cricket into a separate cage to trick buyers. Ancient surround sound. Historians still argue whether the panic over disappearing crickets was rooted in genuine affection, symbolic anxiety about death, or a bizarre early version of seasonal affective disorder. Probably all three. Because when something small and steady leaves your life, even if it's just a bug, it leaves a gap bigger than you expect. There were even superstitions. In some villages, the last chirp of the season was believed to carry a wish. If you heard it clearly and whispered your desire before it faded, that wish would ride the sound into the spirit world. What happened after nobody really knew. But you can bet thousands of whispered dreams rode on cricket wings every year. Back in the scholar's room, your own bug has resumed chirping faintly rhythmically, as if reminding you that he's still here. For now, you relax again. But somewhere in the back of your mind, you wonder how long until your little singer falls silent. You won't know when the last chirp will come. That's part of the magic and the sadness, because the moment will sneak up on you. Maybe you'll be preparing a poem. Maybe you'll be sipping tea. Maybe you'll just be lying here half asleep like now. And then... nothing. Just quiet. Just the cool breath of night through the window. Just your heartbeat. And the soft, sudden realization that something beautiful has passed without asking your permission. And you'll sit with that. And that somehow will be the most human thing you've done all week. The silence lingers just a little longer this time. Long enough for your chest to tighten. Not with fear, just with that quiet sense that something's about to change. Then mercifully your little cricket chirps again. Not loud, but with that familiar rhythm. He's still here, for now. But if you're already getting emotional about this tiny singer, you're not alone. Because in ancient China, when a beloved cricket passed away, it wasn't always brushed off as just a bug. Sometimes it was treated like the loss of a companion. Yes, cricket funerals were a real thing. Now let's be clear. Not every cricket got a send-off. The average household might thank their pet with a small gesture, returning it to the garden, saying a brief goodbye. But for scholars, for poets, for men who'd whispered secrets and heard chirps in reply, across dozens of sleepless nights, they couldn't just toss the cricket away. No, they gave them burials. Tiny, intricate, surprisingly heartfelt farewells. You picture it now, a quiet morning after a long night. The scholar wakes and leans toward the gourd. No sound, he waits, taps the wood gently. Nothing. He opens the cage. The cricket lies still, its wings folded, its legs curled inward, just like that gone. He sits there for a long time, tea growing cold, and then, like many before him, he begins the ritual. The cricket is removed with care, wrapped in a small scrap of silk, often red or gold, the same colours used for temple offerings. Then it's placed inside a tiny box, sometimes bamboo, sometimes clay, sometimes carved wood with a painted lid. A few were even lined with paper scroll fragments, as if the cricket had been part of the writing process all along. Some were buried in garden corners beneath peach trees or beside koi ponds. Others rested on rooftops so the wind might carry their song into the beyond. One record tells of a scholar placing his cricket inside a silver snuff box and floating it down the river like a tiny funeral boat. Was this overly sentimental? Sure. Did it absolutely happen? Also, yes. Some families even passed down burial spots, tiny patches of ground where generations of singing companions were laid to rest. A few old estates even had full-on cricket cemeteries, each with little stones or wooden markers carved with the names of the bugs, and a single poetic line he chirped in autumn. He sang of stillness. Historians still argue whether these funerals were sincere acts of mourning poetic indulgence, or some complex symbolic performance of refined grief. But what can't be denied is how many of them there were. The sheer number of documented tributes, tombs and verses points to a bond that went far beyond novelty. One particularly dramatic gentleman from the early Ming dynasty composed an elegy for his cricket so elaborate that it was mistaken for a eulogy to a lost lover. It contained 400 lines and was titled Ode to the One Who Sang When All Else Failed. Somewhere around stanza 290 he wrote, I held your cage beside my dreams, your chirp the string that stitched the seams, and now that string has snapped and died, no voice, no verse, no one beside. You kind of want to roll your eyes, but also you kind of don't, because haven't you at some point loved something small more than made sense? A pet, a song, a favourite old mug that cracked in the sink. Sometimes it's the smallest things that hold us together, and ancient scholars weren't immune to that softness. They lived hard, pressure-heavy lives. Their success depended on memorising hundreds of texts, pleasing capricious examiners, writing in styles they didn't always believe in. They were told to be stoic, disciplined, endlessly patient. And yet when a tiny cricket died they cried. Maybe not out loud, maybe not in front of others, but you can feel it in the verses in the stories, in the way they held onto those final chirps like sacred echoes. You lie there and for a second you imagine what your cricket's farewell might sound like. Would you wrap him in silk, plant him beneath the ficus, write a silly haiku? Would you miss the sound or just the presence? The cricket chirps again. You smile. Not tonight. He's still here, still singing, still helping you drift from memory to meaning. And in the stillness you remember something important. Mourning something doesn't mean it was grand. It just means it mattered. The moon has begun its slow descent behind the rooftops, and the room is soaked in that pale bluish quiet that comes just before first light. You don't need a clock to know morning is coming, you can feel it in your bones, in the way your breath feels just a touch cooler, and in the way your little companion's chirps have grown softer, as if he too is winding down. And in that soft sound you hear something deeper, a scholar's soul. Because in the slow repetitive rhythm of the cricket's call, ancient scholars believed they heard not just noise but a reflection of themselves, their struggles, their hopes, their inner tempo. This wasn't metaphor, it was taken quite literally. The cricket for many became a mirror not of appearance but of being. Confucian thinkers steeped in ideas of restraint, discipline and endurance admired the cricket's persistence. It sang not to entertain, but because that was its nature. It endured cold wind darkness, and yet it chirped, reliable, even when no one was listening. Taoist philosophers, by contrast, saw the cricket as a creature perfectly attuned to the Tao, the natural way. It lived simply. It moved with the seasons. It didn't chase status or build walls of logic. It just was. And that just being was everything. And for the weary, ink-stained scholar burning his 10th candle at midnight, the cricket's presence was proof that the world, though chaotic, still had rhythm. That amid the swirl of scrolls and failed ambitions there was one creature whose voice always returned. Historians still argue whether crickets were genuinely seen as sacred or merely convenient symbols. Some claim the connection was exaggerated later by romantic biographers. Others point to calligraphy scrolls, poems and personal journals as proof that these bugs weren't just pets, they were philosophical companions. One early Qing scholar wrote, "I study to discipline my mind. The cricket sings because it has none. Yet in the stillness of his call I remember what thinking feels like before it becomes worry. You let that thought settle in. A mind before it becomes worry. That sounds peaceful." In this way, crickets became more than white noise. They became a kind of ethical presence, a reminder to stay centered, to keep going, to sing your part no matter how small. This idea filtered into the way scholars structured their lives. Some placed cricket cages not just near their sleeping mats, but by their writing desks. The chirp wasn't a distraction, it was pacing. It reminded the hand not to rush the brush, not to wobble. One poet said, "The chirp aligns my lines. Without it, my meter falters." Others used cricket chirps as timers. A single chirp was said to be worth 3 or 4 heartbeats. A set of 20 chirps marked a period of focused study. If you heard 40, you were due a stretch. It wasn't scientific, but it worked. And more importantly, it soothed. Imagine no ticking clock, no digital alerts, just the steady rhythm of a bug in a gourd keeping pace with your thoughts. You wonder, lying there, if we haven't lost something in our quest for precision. Something gentle, something forgiving. Because the cricket doesn't judge, it doesn't say you're behind, it just sings, over and over, until you catch your breath and remember that life is lived not in bursts of productivity but in quiet moments of presence. The cricket beside you chirps, then chirps again, 2 short, 1 long. You smile. That's his thing now. You've started to recognize it. You imagine being an old man hunched over a writing table, whispering, "Ah yes, my dear companion returns with his favourite verse," and then scribbling it down like a haiku, 2 short, 1 long, like breath in cold paper air. He sings, I reply. Some traditions even saw the cricket as a guardian spirit. Children were told to keep them near their beds to chase away bad dreams. Elderly monks meditated to their rhythm. Superstitious villagers believed a cricket's sudden silence foretold change, sometimes good, sometimes not. But most often the cricket was simply a reminder that life is fleeting, that music can come from anywhere, that sometimes the smallest voice is the one that keeps you company through the longest nights. You reach out now, just brushing your fingers against the gourd side. Your cricket pauses, then chirps, like he noticed, like he understands. And you think about how strange this all is. A little insect, a gourd, 1,000 years of people listening, whispering, writing. But it doesn't feel silly, it feels right, because some souls don't speak in words. Some speak in rhythm, in patience. in tiny, impossible songs that somehow make your heart slow down and your eyelids grow heavier. And as your eyes finally begin to close, you hear one last line echo gently in your mind. The scholar reads, the poet writes, the cricket reminds. You don't remember falling asleep, but you do remember dreaming. And in that dream you are back in a scholar's room, but different this time. The walls glowed with lantern light. The air smelled like ginger and old parchment. You were writing with a brush, but the ink trailed behind like smoke. Every time you paused, a cricket chirped, and somehow the chirps guided your hand. You awoke with the impression that something mystical had happened, something that felt almost real. And if you'd lived 1,000 years ago in Song Dynasty China, you wouldn't have questioned that feeling at all. In fact, you might have seriously believed that the cricket had touched your dream. Because yes, you're entering the stranger corners of the story now, cricket alchemy and dream potions. Somewhere in the folds of Taoist medicine, folk ritual and poetic madness, crickets gained a reputation not just as soothing companions, but as dream agents. Let's start simple. Sound affects the mind. We know this now, white noise machines, ASMR rainfall loops, gentle music. But long before modern science tried to explain it, ancient Chinese healers believed that the frequency and rhythm of certain natural sounds could guide the spirit into rest, even into other states of consciousness. And crickets were top of the list. Not all crickets, mind you, only those with specific tonal patterns. Some chirped in steady heartbeat-like pulses that were said to encourage lucid dreaming. Others had a drifting chirp which mimicked the natural fade of breath during early sleep stages. The rarest, most prized ones, crickets with unpredictable intervals said to lure the mind out of its waking rhythm entirely. One treatise from the Ming period, more magic than science, describes a ritual where a scholar would place a cricket cage near his pillow, drink a tea of roasted millet and goji berries, and recite a poem 3 times before sleep. The goal: to unloose the knots of the mind and walk beyond the wall of dreaming. Did it work? Well, let's say the reviews were mixed. But it didn't stop there. In some Taoist circles, crickets were used in actual alchemy, not in the gold from lead sense, but in the sense of herbalism, breathwork, and subtle energy manipulation. The cricket's voice was considered a natural frequency, and matching one's breath to that rhythm was thought to align the body with the stillness of heaven. Some practitioners created sleeping potions meant to be consumed alongside cricket chirp meditation. These included ingredients like chrysanthemum petals, crushed peach pit, tiny flakes of mica, don't try that one, and drops of dew collected from lotus leaves at dawn. And yes, people paid good money for this. Historians still argue whether this was part of legitimate healing practice or fringe mysticism. Some claim the use of crickets in sleep rituals was limited to poetic eccentrics and Taoist dreamers. Others insist it was more widespread, pointing to household manuals and apothecary lists that include cricket water as a remedy for restlessness. Cricket water, by the way, was just water stored beside a chirping cricket for 3 days. Was it placebo? Probably. But if you've ever left your tea to steep beside your favourite music and felt like it somehow tasted better, you kind of get it. And let's not forget the fertility angle. In certain rural areas, especially in southern provinces, newlywed couples were advised to keep a cricket cage near their bed. The chirping was said to promote harmony, increase romantic dreams, and even encourage successful conception. No pressure, of course. You lie there now in your very unmagical modern bed and imagine explaining this to someone. Yes, this is my gourd. That's a cricket inside. He ensures deep dreams, spiritual alignment, and possibly children. Try fitting that into a dating app profile. Still, you can't help but find some charm in it. The idea that sound, gentle, ancient sound could guide not just sleep, but the quality of dreams. That listening could shape what we see behind our eyelids. That our inner world could be tuned like a zither string with one little voice pulling it gently into harmony. Even now, your own mind drifts. You catch yourself blinking slower, your body heavier, your thoughts less linear. And the cricket chirps on, 1, 2, pause, 1, 2, 3. It's not predictable, it's not mechanical, it's alive, and that's what makes it powerful. In some temples, monks would sit for hours beside cricket cages, not speaking, not thinking, just breathing in time with the song. The idea was not to control the mind, but to join it with something simpler, steadier. A voice that came from the earth itself. You wonder for a moment what it would be like to be that kind of person. To sit without distraction. To listen until the listening becomes dreaming. To dream without trying. And maybe tonight, you don't need to wonder. Maybe the cricket will show you how. You stretch slightly on the mat, your limbs relaxed, your mind floating somewhere between thoughts and the soft hum of your cricket's endless rhythm. The moon is nearly gone now, giving way to the ghostly grey of early morning. The world hasn't quite started, but you have. Sort of. And right now your mind is travelling back into palaces, back into scroll-filled chambers, and straight into the quiet corridors of government housing. Because yes, for a time, imperial officials were expected to keep a cricket in their rooms, and not just as decoration. These bugs weren't feng shui charms or ambient noise machines. They were considered essential companions to those tasked with managing the empire. You'd think these high-ranking bureaucrats would be too busy to babysit bugs. But no. In the era when order and harmony were seen as divine mandates, so too was the careful listening to nature's most consistent voice. So how did this begin? It likely started quietly, literally, with a few scholar officials keeping crickets beside their beds during long postings in far provinces. They were exiled from capital life, far from family stuck mediating rice disputes in swampy towns. What comforted them? A poem, some tea, and a cricket who never asked for anything but a little water and patience. Over time this habit spread. As the bureaucratic class grew, so too did their peculiar traditions. Crickets were soon seen as part of the emotional toolkit of an imperial official. They calmed nerves. They reminded you of home. They helped you sleep through the regrets of an awkward policy memo or an overly stern verdict in a village land case. But there was more than nostalgia at play. In Confucian philosophy, good governance begins with self-cultivation. Before you can rule others, you must be in balance. And what better symbol of inner rhythm than a creature who literally sings the passage of time? So officials weren't just allowed to keep crickets, some were encouraged to. Manuals on household management for provincial administrators mention the presence of a cricket cage near the sleeping mat as a sign of attentiveness to the natural rhythm of the heavens. Imagine that being part of your performance review. Positive leadership in tax collection, decent poetry, needs improvement in nighttime insect management. One famous Song Dynasty magistrate, Shenzong Yan, became so well known for the pristine tone of his chamber cricket that it was said his verdicts rang with the same clarity. He claimed that sleeping beside the bug taught him fairness, for he sings the same whether it is rich night or poor. Not everyone was convinced, of course. Historians still argue whether these official cricket companions were genuinely spiritual aids or just trendy stress relief accessories. Some critics at the time called it whimsy for the weak-hearted, claiming it distracted administrators from real work. Others predictably turned it into status competition. Who had the rarest chirp, the most finely carved cage, the most resonant gourd? You can picture the bureaucrat banter at the annual autumn review. Your district's literacy scores are up jang, but your cricket's tone was terribly nasal. Ah, but he harmonizes with the wind liu. Does yours do that? Mine harmonizes with heaven. And yet beneath the snark and self-importance, something more human was going on. Imagine being stationed for years in the outer provinces, far from home, drowning in scrolls and expectations, your only real company after sunset. The rhythmic chirp of a tiny life reminding you that the world still turns, that you're still here, that even in failure or exile, music remains. There's even a letter from an anonymous court clerk found in the margins of a tax record that reads, I miss my wife, my city, my wine. But the cricket sings on, and I think I must still be a man. That's not poetry. That's loneliness, filtered through gourd bars. Cricket keeping became so tied to governance that for a brief time in the early Ming period, a few officials were known to bring their crickets into court meetings, not in a showy way, just present, on their desk, chirping softly while scrolls were read and imperial matters discussed. You'd think the emperor would have shut it down, but no. One particular ruler, Emperor Yingzong, actually found it soothing. He once delayed a tribunal because he was worried the noise from the court would upset the rhythm of Small One, his personal cricket. Small One was kept in a gilded gourd with cloud motifs and had 2 attendants assigned to monitor his diet. Naturally, of course not every official was thrilled about all this. One grumpy auditor in the late 1400s wrote, "I cannot think with all this infernal squeaking. Let the bugs sing in the forest, not my chambers. Harmony does not require accompaniment." No one remembered him. Probably didn't have a very good cricket. Back in your imagined scholar's room, the little chirper in the corner continues his solo. No court to attend, no tax disputes to settle. Just one bug, one voice, one rhythm. You wonder what kind of official you'd have been. Probably not the tyrant type, maybe more of a wandering magistrate, the kind who showed mercy, wrote verse, drank his tea slowly, and kept a gourd by the window, not because it was fashionable, but because in the end it made the nights feel less hollow. The dawn light begins to push softly through the paper windows now. The shadows grow paler. Your cricket chirps again a little bolder, as if warming up for the day shift. You smile and whisper to no one in particular. "I hear you, colleague. We're on the same shift now." Because somewhere deep in the ancient empire, long before emails and alarms and crowded trains, there were men in robes and sandals listening to crickets to remember who they were supposed to be, and maybe you're one of them, just with different paperwork. You're still lying in the soft afterglow of almost sleep, but something has changed in the light. It's golden now, gentler, warmer. Not quite sunrise, but enough to paint the edges of the room in quiet amber. The chirping has grown sparse. Your little companion knows what time it is. And as you listen, that same rhythm echoes somewhere deeper. Not in the room, but in memory. Because tonight isn't just about scholars and courtiers, it's about grandparents, storytellers, whisperers of tradition, carriers of tiny songs passed down like heirlooms. Yes, this is about legacy. Why, grandfather always had a cage. Picture it. A rural courtyard in late autumn. A white-haired man sits on a stone stool, sunlight on his shoulder, a bamboo cage resting beside his teacup. Children sit cross-legged in front of him, and the cricket inside. He sings not just for the old man, but for the whole lineage. This scene, mundane as it may sound, played out across centuries in provinces all over China. Crickets weren't just a pastime, they were family tradition. And no one embodied this more than the grandfather. He was the keeper of quiet wisdom, the one who knew how to tie tiny feeding sticks out of willow twigs, who knew which corner of the field sang loudest during late harvest. He'd catch a cricket not with haste, but with reverence, as if harvesting memory itself. In many households, a boy's first real ritual with his grandfather wasn't lighting incense or reading Confucius. It was learning how to find hold and house a cricket, one step at a time. First silence, then the crouch, the listening, the lift of a stone, the quiet coaxing of a thumb and a twig, the transfer into a hand-carved gourd that had belonged to the family for decades. Some gourds were passed down for generations, polished by fingers long since gone. Tiny inscriptions lined the inside lids, names of previous crickets, dates, maybe even a line of poetry scrawled in fading ink. A diary of song. Historians still debate how widespread this tradition truly was. Some say it was more common in the north. Others claim it spread mostly among retired bureaucrats who fled the capital and carried their habits into the countryside. But everyone agrees the image of the old man with his cricket became a symbol of calm, of seasonal awareness, of generational continuity. It wasn't just the act of keeping a cricket, it was how he kept it. He didn't adjust the cage every 5 minutes. He didn't force it to chirp. He listened when it sang, and when it didn't, he simply waited. He taught patience, not control. One Ming-era tale describes a young boy who complained that the family cricket wasn't as loud as the neighbours. The grandfather said nothing, but that evening placed the boy in the middle of the courtyard and made him sit until he could hear their own cricket's song above the wind, the chickens and the laughter from next door. It took 30 minutes. The boy learned. In this way, the cricket became more than entertainment. It was a lesson, in attention, in presence, in respecting silence as much as sound. Cricket keeping also became a bridge between generations, between cities and villages, between formal study and the rhythm of daily life. You didn't need to pass the imperial exam to appreciate a cricket's chirp. You didn't need a polished gourd or poetic talent. All you needed was care. There's an old saying, a father teaches law, a mother teaches love, but a grandfather teaches time. And nothing taught time like a cricket. Its lifespan was short, its song seasonal, its rhythm brief, regular, finite. It reminded the young of impermanence, and the old of purpose. You imagine now a dusty shelf in a modest home holding a dozen small cages, some empty, some silent, just one still singing, the last student of a long line of listeners. In more ritual-heavy families, crickets were even part of ancestral offerings. During mid-autumn festivals, a cricket might be placed near the family shrine, singing softly while incense rose. Some believed the chirping helped stir the sleeping names, a poetic way of saying help the ancestors hear us again. In some rare cases, grandchildren took on the role of caretaker after a grandfather passed. One story tells of a boy who continued to feed his grandfather's cricket for weeks after the funeral, believing that as long as it sings, he is still here. And isn't that what we all hope for deep down? That something small might carry us forward. That a piece of our rhythm survives. Even now in a modern city with blaring horns and glowing screens, there are old men in quiet apartments, brushing their crickets' legs with soft feathers, whispering poems, drinking tea. Their cages are smaller now, the songs sometimes drowned by traffic, but they keep going, because someone once showed them how. You lie back down. Your own cricket sings softer now, as if tired from carrying so much history tonight. You think about your own elders, the rhythms they left behind, the sounds you didn't notice until they were gone. And maybe this chirp is a reminder not just of history, but of legacy. Because in every chirp there is someone who taught it, and in every listener someone still learning how. The sun hasn't quite risen yet, but the air is beginning to shift. It has that faint golden breath of pre-dawn, like the world itself is stretching. The shadows in the scholar's room have thinned, and your eyes, though heavy, are still open, pulled forward by one more chapter in this long, strange lullaby. Tonight we've sat with emperors and scholars, we've drifted with poets and grandfathers, but now we walk a different path, one lined with regrets, not laurels. A winding trail through the weeds of history, guided only by a tiny cage swinging from a branch. Because not all cricket companions sang beside beds of silk. Some chirped into exile. Yes, crickets went with the banished. In ancient China, exile was a common fate for scholars who spoke too freely, who backed the wrong court faction, who wrote a poem that was a little too clever, or who simply annoyed someone more powerful. A missed tone, a misread metaphor, and suddenly you found yourself stripped of your post and sent to the edge of the empire, far from family reputation and relevance. But in that far-off silence, some still heard a song. There are letters, real aching letters written by exiled officials to friends back in the capital, where their only described companion is my small singer in the gourd. One wrote, "He chirps as if the night does not know my name has been scratched from memory." And just like that, a cricket becomes more than background noise. It becomes proof of continuity, a heartbeat, a friend. Exile was more than physical distance. It was psychological erasure. In a culture obsessed with hierarchy and face being cast out was like being erased from the painting of history. But a cricket didn't care. A cricket didn't ask if you had favour at court. It chirped in the same rhythm no matter your address. You picture it now. A ragged scholar, his robes patched at the knees, sitting under a pine tree on a hillside overlooking the sea. He's writing slowly, deliberately, as if words now cost time. His inkstone is chipped, his scroll creased. But beside him is the gourd, and inside it the familiar pulse of home. In one famous case, Suja, younger brother to the more famous Sushi, was exiled to Hainan Island, then considered the absolute edge of the civilized world. But in his journals he writes fondly of the island crickets. They know nothing of politics. They care not that I am fallen. Their song does not waver. Some scholars even believed exile sharpened the cricket's meaning. In the quiet the chirp was louder, more insistent, a contrast to the social silence that surrounded them. And yes, some tried to bring their crickets with them. Imagine it. You're handed your exile notice told to pack for 6 years of coastal wind and isolation. You grab robes, ink, food, and that one little gourd from your desk, the one you can't leave behind. Some didn't make it. The journey was long, rough. In certain cases, mournful notes describe crickets that died before the first hill, and the grief deep, perhaps deeper than the fall from status. Because when you're banished and everything else is stripped away, what remains becomes sacred. That chirp was a tether to the world that once loved you. Its loss felt final. Historians still debate whether crickets were permitted during official exile. Some believe they were banned as distractions, others argue they were allowed as symbols of moral introspection. Whatever the rules, people found ways to keep them close. There's a recorded story of a minor official who, after being banished to the southern mountains, built a small shrine for his cricket. Not as a pet, but as a sort of confessor. He sat with it each night, whispering the decisions he regretted, the alliances he should have made. The cricket never replied. That was the point. It just chirped. One friend wrote to him, "You are forgotten by men, but remembered by the gourd." The bond was so strong that in some cases scholars refused to replace a lost cricket. They believed that only the one that had travelled with them truly understood, that a new chirp would feel dishonest, like speaking to a stranger in the middle of grief, and so they kept the empty gourd, hung it by their bed, listened to the wind through its carved holes, remembered what the song used to sound like. You lie there now thinking about the times in your own life when you felt exiled not from a nation, but from comfort, from understanding, from yourself. Those nights when silence felt louder than any noise. And maybe you remember something, a sound, a phrase, a voice, even a playlist that helped. That one little anchor in the night. Maybe it was a cricket. Maybe it was your own heartbeat. But it got you through. That's what the banished learned. Survival isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it sings in small, steady pulses, reminding you that the world has not fully turned its back. Because even in exile, even stripped of name and status, even sleeping on a stone floor with nothing but wind for company, the cricket sang. And so did you. The sun finally begins to rise, not like a trumpet, but like a whisper. The first thin strands of gold slip through the paper window and land gently on the edge of the gourd, casting shadows that stretch like long fingers across the floor. Your cricket, who's been with you through the deepest hours, chirps one last time before quieting. Maybe he's tired too. But before the day begins, before the scrolls are opened or the tea is poured, there's one last memory to wander into. Because while some crickets sang beside scholars and emperors and others travelled with exiles, most simply lived in the hearts of everyday families. And nowhere was this clearer than in the evening hush of the Ming Dynasty courtyard. where entire households gathered to listen to their crickets, in what could only be described as a backyard concert. Imagine it! The heat of the day has passed. The shadows have cooled the brick pathways. A grandmother sits fanning herself near the fish pond. Children are chasing each other barefoot under the hanging lanterns, and somewhere in the corner on a smooth wooden stand beneath a climbing vine rest 4 or 5 gourd cages. Inside them the stars of the evening crickets tuning up. Each family had their favourite. Quiet drummer, small rain, third moon. Everyone knew which bug belonged to whom, which chirp came from which corner. Some cages were covered with silk to muffle the volume. Others were elevated slightly to catch the evening breeze because airflow, it turns out, helps with resonance. You sit down on a stone bench beside an old man polishing the rim of a gourd with oil from his palm. He nods to the chorus rising softly from the background. This, he says, is better than a flute, and cheaper too. In Ming cities, particularly in Jiangnan, cricket listening became a regular evening ritual. It was the ancient equivalent of a music hour, a communal podcast, a gentle routine that signalled the day's end. Work was over, study was done. Now it was time to sip something warm and let the crickets sing. And this wasn't reserved for scholars, labourers, merchants, servants, children, grandmothers. Everyone could take part. Because unlike music from a zither or poems from an elite court, crickets were accessible. You didn't need to be literate, you just needed to listen. Some even believed that different chirps could help with different ailments. A fast high chirp could lift the mood. A slow deep tone might ease indigestion. Families would collect specific crickets for specific evenings. Mother has headaches again, bring the low-voiced one from the kitchen shelf. Was his science not quite? Was it care absolutely? Cricket cages were often handed around like treasured heirlooms. Someone's gourd might be from last year. Another might be a recent catch, fresh and eager. Children were given the task of misting the leaves inside the cages, or refreshing the tiny food trays, a slice of cucumber, a dot of cooked millet, a drop of honeyed water. The crickets, for their part, were mostly content. They sang, they slept. They occasionally startled when a child squealed too loud or a dog barked too close. But mostly they added their thread to the household tapestry. Some families held informal competitions, not the battle matches of court life, but which bug sings most sweetly. They'd sit in a circle, uncover each cage one by one and take turns listening. Not judging, just noticing, appreciating. And the reactions weren't loud. No applause, no shouting, just nods, smiles. Sometimes a quiet ah of approval. Because this wasn't about performance. It was about presence. Historians still argue whether this practice was universal or limited to specific regions or classes. But first-hand accounts from domestic journals and household almanacs describe the practice in gentle rhythmic detail. One record describes the courtyard listening ritual as a time when the house breathes together. Some nights neighbours would join in, cages brought over in baskets, cups of tea exchanged, crickets compared. Yours sings like a temple bell, one might say. Yours sounds like water dripping from a pine cone. And no one was wrong, because it was all metaphor, all music. Sometimes a family's cricket would stop chirping. The cage would go quiet, and just like that the tone of the evening would shift. It's his time, the father might say. He sang all summer, let him rest. And the cage would remain on the shelf, empty but still honoured, for the memory of its song. In one story, a young girl cried when her cricket fell silent, refusing to eat until another one was found. But her grandfather refused. "We don't replace voices," he said. "We remember them." That night the family sat in silence, but they imagined the chirp, and somehow it was still there. You lie there now in the echo of those evenings, wondering what it must have felt like to end each day, not with screens or noise or schedules, but with a shared moment of quiet music from something too small to demand your attention, but just big enough to deserve it. Your own cricket miraculously gives one more chirp, a tiny encore, a whisper that says this night isn't over yet. You imagine bringing him out into a courtyard, others with their crickets, not competing, just listening. A concert where no one plays and everyone sings. And maybe that's how it should be. Because not all music is meant to move us. Some is just meant to hold us. Gently, silently, together. The world outside has started to wake soft bird calls from distant branches, a rustle of morning wind through the trees, and somewhere far off the creak of a wooden door being opened. But your room is still quiet, still safe. The cricket beside you remains silent, perhaps, dreaming in its own way, wings tucked, legs still. But as your mind drifts, it catches on a peculiar idea, one you didn't expect to find in this sleepy tapestry of history. What if some of those chirps weren't real at all? Yes, we've reached the strange and slightly hilarious chapter of this story, Fake Chirps, Real Money. Because where there's value, be it musical, emotional or cultural, there will always be imitators. And in ancient China, the art of faking a cricket became something of a niche industry. Now you may be asking, why would anyone fake a cricket chirp? Well, let's review the facts. Crickets were status symbols, sleep aids, poetry muses, emotional support, insects and even bedside healers. If your prize chirper died too early, or never chirped to begin with, you had a few options: catch a new one, commission a professional to hunt the hills, or cheat. Enter mechanical chirpers. Yes, they existed. Crafted from bamboo, bone or metal, these small devices, often no bigger than your thumb, use tiny reeds, whistles or vibration chambers to mimic a cricket's call. Some required breath to operate. Others used wind or the shaking of a small cage. The most sophisticated versions included hidden bellows that, when placed near a flickering flame or warm airflow, would activate automatically. You'd set the mechanism near your mat, hidden among your real cricket cages, and voila, chirp restored. No one need know your original companion had retired or been accidentally squashed under a scroll. The earliest known fake chirper appears in a Song Dynasty home inventory list, under the charming name Wind Voice Box, imitating autumn. That's poetic marketing if we've ever heard it. These devices weren't just curiosities. They were traded, sold, and in some cases gifted, especially among the elderly, or those who no longer had the patience or eyesight to hunt live crickets. One surviving manual explains, "The artificial song lacks soul but preserves the rhythm," which is either the most honest sales pitch in history or the saddest. But the fakery didn't stop there. Some vendors, in a twist of moral innovation, boosted real crickets using subtle tricks, like placing tiny echo chambers near the cages to make the chirp sound fuller. A piece of parchment behind the cage could reflect and deepen the sound. A sliver of gourd set at an angle amplified the resonance, not unlike the early principles of a violin body. More deceptive sellers would insert tiny slivers of bamboo under the cricket's wings to alter pitch. In extreme cases, they'd glue a tiny reed instrument to the underside of the cage and pretend the sound came from the bug. And yes, people fell for it. Not always, but often enough. There's a particularly famous court anecdote about a minister who spent a small fortune on what he believed was a northern thunder cricket, a rare type with a low rumbling chirp. He bragged about it at gatherings, wrote poems to it, had it painted by a local artist. Then one night a drunken guest tipped over the cage. The cricket clattered to the floor, an empty shell with a carved reed mechanism stuffed inside. The scandal was immediate. The poems were burned, the artist was questioned, and the poor minister, now known as Sir Windpipe, retired early and spent the rest of his life in tasteful silence. Historians still argue whether these fake chirpers were considered legitimate tools or social embarrassments. Some claim they were accepted in moderation, useful for elders or travellers. Others insist they were frowned upon, the ancient equivalent of lip-syncing. One scholar wrote, It is better to live with silence than with an echo that lies. A dramatic take perhaps, but you get the sentiment. What's more fascinating though is that some listeners couldn't tell the difference, especially when the fake chirper was combined with a soft fan breeze or ambient outdoor noise. The illusion held up well enough to soothe sleepers. One Ming Diary entry confesses, "I thought it was my faithful singer. Only in the spring did I learn the truth. But by then, I had already slept in peace." And isn't that the most human thing of all? To cling to comfort even if it's not quite real. To let your heart believe because the rhythm is close enough. It's a quiet lesson hidden in the hum of a reed whistle. Sometimes the imitation matters less than the feeling it gives you. Back in your own room, you glance at the little gourd just to be sure it's real. He's in there. A little motion behind the slats confirms it. But even if he weren't, would the piece be any less valuable? You think about how often we trick ourselves into calm sleep sounds on apps. White noise machines pretending to be rain playlists of crickets from places we've never been. And you realise we're not so different. We still chase the illusion of rhythm, still crave something steady to lull us through the dark. Maybe it's not deception, maybe it's devotion. To silence, to stillness, to the belief that even if the song isn't authentic, the feeling absolutely is. The wind moves again, a breeze drifts across your mat, and for a moment you wonder if the chirp you hear is real, or just memory echoing through the dawn. Either way, you close your eyes, and let it carry you. The room is brighter now, morning's light filling in every fold of fabric, every grain of wood, every little groove on the gourd that holds your tired but loyal cricket. He hasn't chirped in a while, but you don't mind. You're still in that dreamy half space between sleep and history, between fact and feeling. And somewhere in that foggy warmth, one last question bubbles up like morning tea. How did this all last for so long? How did the simple sound of a bug's legs become a 1,000-year obsession? How did it survive dynasties, disasters, revolutions, and the ever-turning wheel of fashion? Welcome to one of the most quietly resilient cultural habits in human history, 1,000 years of tiny songs. See, cricket keeping wasn't a fad. It didn't flare up and vanish like powdered wigs or foot-bound shoes. It lingered, changed, adapted, and like the chirp itself kept going soft steady just beneath the noise. Let's start with the geography. Cricket culture stretched across massive distances, from the sophisticated courtyards of Hangzhou to the rural hills of Sichuan, from the icy edges of Manchuria to the humid towns of the south. People listened. Rich, poor, educated, illiterate, no one was immune to the spell of that rhythm. In some towns, crickets were caught and sold like any other seasonal product, bundled in baskets, auctioned in open-air markets, given as gifts between friends. In others, they were part of folklore woven into bedtime stories and harvest rituals. There were temples with cricket carvings on the beams, opera troupes that mimicked cricket chirps in their songs, even family crests with stylized crickets curled among the clouds. The reasons for their longevity start with simplicity. Crickets are everywhere. They don't require wealth, schooling, or status. A child could catch one. A farmer could keep one, and once caught they ask for almost nothing. A gourd, a few drops of water, a pinch of rice, and they'll sing for weeks. Then add symbolism. The cricket became a metaphor for everything that matters but doesn't shout. Patience, persistence, presence. The idea that life, no matter how fleeting or fragile, could still offer beauty. Scholars wrote this again and again. He sings though he will not see spring. And finally, rebellion. Yes, rebellion. Because even though this tradition was deeply tied to the scholar class and Confucian ideals, it also became a form of quiet resistance. Especially during eras of chaos, foreign rule, civil war, dynastic collapse, keeping a cricket was a way of saying, I still believe in beauty, I still listen, I still remember. Historians still argue whether cricket culture was genuinely subversive or simply nostalgic, a way to cling to the past when the future looked bleak. But there's no denying this. People clung harder to their chirping companions when the world outside fell apart. During the fall of the Ming dynasty, there were reports of families abandoning furniture and valuables but taking their cricket cages. One man wrote, "The soldiers came. I left behind my writing, my coins, my robes. But I took old Night Singer. I needed the sound." And isn't that what we all do? In crisis, we hold on to the small, steady things, the voice in the dark, the rhythm we can rely on, the fragile little echo that reminds us we are still here. Even when modernity rolled in trains, telegraph, streetlights, the crickets didn't stop. In fact, they adapted. Urban vendors began selling crickets in paper boxes. Tin chirper toys became popular, and some clever craftspeople designed portable gourd holders that clip to one's robe belt so your companion could come with you to the tea house or the library. There was even a brief moment during the Republican era when cricket breeders formed unions. Yes, cricket unions. They argued over fair pricing, trading routes and standardized cage dimensions. A meeting of the Guangzhou Cricket Breeders' Society in 1923 lasted for 5 hours and ended in an actual fistfight over feeding recommendations. Human nature unchanged, and through it all the chirp remained. The same two-note rhythm unchanged since the Tang poets first listened with their ink-stained fingers pressed to the gourd. You lie back now, stretching slightly. The sunlight has reached the far wall. The day has begun, but the chirp still lives in your mind. You realize you've memorized it not just in sound, but in feel. Your breath matches its pace. Your thoughts settle around its shape. It has become your rhythm, and maybe that's the answer to its endurance. Not politics, not poetry, not tradition, but habit. A habit of listening, of quiet, of presence. In a world that rarely stops moving, where even rest is optimized and measured, the cricket sings at its own pace. It doesn't care who hears. It doesn't chase applause. It just sings because that's what it does. And we strange, sleepless creatures that we are gather around to listen, not because the chirp is grand, but because it's enough. Enough to soothe, enough to remind, enough to last 1,000 years. You blink slowly. A new sound filters in modern sharp distant. A delivery truck. A cell phone alarm in the next apartment. The waking world. But before it fully arrives, you press your hand gently to the gourd. No chirp, not yet. Still you whisper thank you, because in your dreams he's still singing. The day is fully here now, golden and soft and real. You can hear the world moving again, someone sweeping a courtyard, a kettle, hissing to a boil, birds trilling in the trees. But the space around you still hums with something slower, older. The echo of the night of patience of tiny songs. And in the midst of that gentle warmth you're left with a question, one that has drifted quietly through this entire journey like incense smoke. Why did they really do it? Why did generations of people, scholars, peasants, emperors, exiles, choose to live their nights beside these little insects? Why did they build cages with care, compose poems, whisper secrets, and cry at funerals for creatures that never knew their names? Well, here's the uncomfortable truth. Historians still don't agree. They don't. Even after centuries of written records, poetry, manuals, artifacts, and living tradition, the reason, the core why behind the human-cricket bond remains a matter of debate. Let's explore the theories, because at this point you've earned them. Theory 1, sensory therapy. This is the most grounded explanation. The cricket's song, much like a stream or wind chime, has a calming, repetitive rhythm. It's a form of natural white noise. In a world with no electric fans or Spotify sleep playlists, the cricket was an organic lullaby. Something to smooth the rough edge of thought. Modern scientists back this up. Studies on ambient sound confirm that gentle, predictable patterns help the brain settle. So it's not absurd to think that ancient minds, weary from calligraphy drills and court politics, found peace in the simplest song nature offered. But is that the whole story? Theory 2, Poetic Symbolism. This one gets a bit more mystical. The cricket, some say, wasn't just background noise, it was a living metaphor for mortality, for resilience, for voice. The fact that it sang only in autumn, only when the leaves began to fall, made it a seasonal symbol of beautiful decay. You've heard this in the poems. He sings though frost kisses the grass. He sings though winter knocks. To live like the cricket, then, was to accept the brevity of life and still offer a gift. Still sing, still be present. And in that, the cricket became a guide, not just for sleep, but for living. Theory 3, Loneliness. This one stings a little, but it may be closest to the heart. Many of the great scholar poets of China lived profoundly isolated lives, either physically in exile or rural retreat, or emotionally in rigid court structures that punished free thought and discouraged intimacy. The cricket was quite simply a companion, a presence, a soft, regular reminder that one wasn't entirely alone. It asked nothing, it judged nothing, it stayed, even when humans didn't. Think of all the people in your own life who've drifted away, the voices that used to be constant, these silences you've had to learn to live with. Now imagine one small voice that never left. Yeah, it wasn't just about the sound. Theory 4, Power and Control. Some scholars take a darker view. They see cricket keeping as part of the Confucian order a metaphor for ruling the world, or at least your corner of it. The cricket sang because you housed it, fed it, protected it. Its song became a symbol of your ability to cultivate harmony both in your household and within yourself. This theory is bolstered by the elaborate rituals rankings, even court titles given to cricket caretakers. Owning the best singer wasn't just aesthetic, it was prestige. Proof that you understood the rhythms of nature and thus deserved respect. But if that were the whole story, would the exiles have brought their crickets with them? Would widowed grandmothers whisper lullabies to empty cages? Probably not. Theory 5, it's all of the above. This one might be the messiest, but it's also the most human. Maybe the truth isn't clean. Maybe people loved crickets for many reasons. Maybe a young student in Chang'an kept one to help him sleep, while a lonely poet in Yunnan kept one, because he'd forgotten what laughter sounded like. Maybe a grandmother kept one because her husband always did. Maybe a child kept one because it was small and alive and wonderful. Maybe it was therapy. Maybe it was metaphor. Maybe it was company. And maybe it just felt good. Historians still argue because they want a single answer, a footnote, a tidy summary. But you lying here after a journey through night and memory already know better. You know that people are complicated. That meaning shifts with mood, that what soothes us today might break our hearts tomorrow. And that's what makes the cricket song so powerful, because it doesn't tell you what to feel, it doesn't push, it just sings. And in its simple, patient rhythm it creates a space for sorrow, for sleep, for memory, for nothing at all. You roll gently onto your side. The gourd is still quiet, he's done singing for now. Or maybe he's just giving you space to think. You whisper to the silence, I still hear you. Because you do. And whether it was therapy, symbolism, legacy, status, or a bit of everything, one thing is clear. The cricket stayed. When lovers left, when fortunes fell, when wars roared, when poems dried up, when names were forgotten, the cricket sang. So whatever historians decide one day, you already know the answer. It sang because it mattered. And we listened because we needed to, and now here we are. The room is fully lit, though the light remains gentle, like the kind that touches your face just before someone calls your name in a dream. You're lying still warm under the blanket, and for a moment nothing moves. Not your breath, not your thoughts, not even the cricket, because this is the end. Not of the story crickets will keep chirping whether we listen or not, but of this long winding journey through time, sound and silence. And the final chapter, it belongs to just one man, not an emperor, not a great poet, Just one last scholar sitting alone in his study with a final cricket in a final cage. There's something reverent about this image, isn't there? No spectacle, no audience, just him hunched gently over the desk, brush poised above the paper, listening. The world has changed. The dynasty has crumbled. The scrolls are out of date. The students no longer come. His calligraphy hand trembles. His tea stays warm longer than he needs it to. And still the cricket sings. His name is lost if it was ever recorded. A quiet man, perhaps the last in his family to keep the tradition. The gourd beside him is old, polished smooth with decades of handling. Inside, the cricket chirps not as brightly as younger ones, but steadily, faithfully. He no longer writes full poems, just lines, half-thoughts, sentences that end not with a period but with a pause. The sound is thinner now, like thread unravelling. Perhaps he forgets I am here, or perhaps I am the one who forgot how to listen. Each morning he checks the cage, feeds his friend a sliver of fruit, listens. Sometimes the cricket doesn't sing. That's all right. They've been through winters before. But one morning, one very ordinary morning, he wakes to silence. Not a dramatic silence, not one that announces itself, just the kind that hangs unnoticed until it's been there too long. He opens the gourd. The cricket is still. Legs curled gently inward, wings folded like hands in prayer. He sits with it a while, doesn't cry, doesn't speak. He just listens, because the silence now has shape. Historians don't record this moment. There's no monument, no scroll, no statue of the last scholar of the cricket songs. But in some ways that's fitting, because his story isn't the ending of a tradition, it's a handoff. To you who listened, you who sat through the chirps and silences, through the poetry and the frauds, through the battles and bedtime stories. You who now carry the rhythm in your breath and the soft sound in your bones. Because now you know. And maybe someday when you can't sleep, when the night feels too heavy or too quiet or too full of thoughts, you'll remember that sound. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find one. A real cricket, a digital echo, a memory. And you'll close your eyes and listen, not for answers, just for presence. Just for rhythm. Just for the oldest, simplest kind of company. A song in the dark. That says you're still here. So now as you lie there, body soft and mind quiet, let the story ease into stillness. There's nothing more to chase tonight. No more scrolls to unroll. No more questions to answer. Only the breath. Only the memory of small things, gourds carved with care cages lined with silk poems, whispered beneath moonlight, and tiny voices that sang without ever knowing who listened. Let your thoughts stretch out like shadows at dusk. Let the images fade gently, soft wings, folded paper doors, an old man's hands polishing wood. Let them blur like ink dropped into warm water. You don't need to remember every name or every fact, just the feeling that someone long ago lay in the dark, just like you, unsure of what tomorrow would bring, but held gently by the rhythm of something small and steady. Maybe you'll dream of quiet courtyards, or walk through fields of tall grass, chasing a sound you can't quite place. Maybe you won't dream at all. That's okay. You've heard the song, and sometimes that's enough. Let your breath deepen. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your thoughts drift like silk in morning wind. You are not alone. You never were. Sleep well, soft listener. The night is full of quiet songs,